Alrighty, so Unit 5 Day 1 is all about operations with polynomials. Now, polynomials are expressions with many terms. So to add polynomials, you just need to combine like terms. Like terms are terms that have the same variables and the same exponents. Non-like terms cannot be added or subtracted. When you add polynomials, the exponents will not change. So let's take a look at number 1. We have to add these two polynomials together, but I can see that we have parentheses. We have a set of parentheses here and also there. So our brains are like, okay, I think we have to use the distributive property, right? Not necessarily, because we know that there is an invisible 1 in front of this parentheses and an invisible 1 in front of the parentheses here. If I distribute the 1 to each term, it really doesn't change anything. That just means you have to drop the parentheses. In this case, we have 3x to the second power plus 7 plus x. And then this other one is plus 14x to the third plus 2 plus x to the second minus x. So then here, this is where we're going to combine the like terms. When we combine like terms, we're going to write our answers in standard form. And how we write this in standard form is we look at the exponents from high to low. So to write our answers in standard form, you write your exponents from high to low. So if I'm looking at this expression, notice that the term with the highest exponent is 14x to the third power. And if I look anywhere else in this expression, I cannot combine that with anything else. So it's just 14x to the third power. And then we're going to go ahead and find the next highest exponent, which is x squared. So look for a term or terms with that variable and exponent. We have 3x squared and x squared. So 3x squared plus x squared, that's 4x squared. So I'll write 4x to the second power. And then we're going to write the variable with the next highest exponent, and that would be just x, right? We have x in negative x, so it's x minus x. X minus x cancel each other out, so we're not going to include that in our answer. And then right after the x, you look for your constants. Constants are just numbers without variables, and that would be this 7 and this 2. So 7 plus 2 is 9. All right, let's take a look at number 2. There's an invisible 1 in front of this parentheses. However, there's a 3 in front of this parentheses. So yes, we're going to distribute the 3 to each term, but with this 1, it really doesn't change much. So I'll write 2x to the third plus 9 minus x. And then that positive 3 times x squared is 3x squared. Positive 3 times negative x is negative 3x. And positive 3 times 5 is positive 15. Again, we'll write our answers in standard form. So exponents from high to low. The highest exponent is the 3. So 2x to the third power, can I combine that with anything else? Nope, so I'll just write 2x to the third power. The next highest exponent is x squared. We have 3x squared. Can I combine that with anything else? Nope, so I'll just write plus 3x to the second power. The next highest exponent would be 1, right? X to the first power. I can see that we have negative x and negative 3x. So negative x minus 3x is negative 4x. And then lastly, we look for our constants. So that would be this positive 9 and this positive 15. So positive 9 plus 15 is 24. And that is our answer. All right, so moving on to subtracting polynomials. So to subtract polynomials, you need to distribute the negative then combine the like terms. When you subtract polynomials, the exponents will not change. So looking at number 3, I can see that we have a negative in front of the parentheses here. And since there's no number in front of the parentheses here, just that negative sign, you can assume that there is a negative 1. So it would be negative 1 multiplied with each term inside of the parentheses. Over here, there's no number in front of the parentheses. So you can just assume that there is a 1 there. And because there's a 1 there, it really doesn't change this expression. So I'll write 3 minus x to the second power, and then that negative 1 gets distributed to each term. So negative 1 times x squared is negative x squared, negative 1 times 6 is negative 6, and negative 1 times negative x, a negative times a negative is a positive, so positive x. Okay, so remember, we still have to follow this rule. We need to write our answers in standard form. So the highest exponent is 2. We have negative x to the second power minus x squared. So negative x squared minus x squared. You can assume that there's a 1 here and a 1 there. So we have negative 1x squared minus 1x squared. That's negative 2x squared. And then we're going to go ahead and find the next highest exponent, which is 1. Or we need to find the term with just an x in it. And that would be this thing right here. It's just an x, right? So it's just plus x. And then we look for constants. That's 3 minus 6, so that's negative 3. So negative 2x squared plus x minus 3 is your answer for number 3. Number 4, there's an invisible 1 here. But if I distribute that to each term, it doesn't change anything. So it's 1 plus 4x to the second power. Whereas this negative 2, yes, you'll distribute. So negative 2 times 3x squared, that's negative 6x to the second power. Negative 2 times positive 2x, negative 2 times positive 2 is negative 4. But since there's an x involved, then you need to slap that on with the negative 4. So negative 2 times positive 2x is negative 4x. And then lastly, we have negative 2 times negative 5. Negative times a negative is a positive. And 2 times 5 is 10. Okay, so now we'll combine the like terms. We'll write our answer in standard form. Highest exponent is 2. I see the x squared here and an x squared here. We have 4x squared minus 6x squared. That's negative 2x squared. And then the next highest exponent is x. So I see a negative 4x, and I can't combine that with anything else. So I'll just write minus 4x. And then lastly, our constants. So it's 1 plus 10. That's 11. So negative 2x squared minus 4x plus 11 is our answer. Okay. To multiply polynomials this time, you need to distribute, which means multiply each term in the first set of parentheses to each term in the second set of parentheses. When you multiply polynomials, the exponents will change, which means you need to add them. Non-like terms can be multiplied together. Okay? Now, the stuff in green that I highlighted, what does that even mean? Let's go ahead and review how to multiply exponents with the same base. So if I were to give you something like y times y to the second power, that's basically y times y times y, because y to the second power is y times y. But there are 3 y's involved. We have y times y times y, which is y to the third power. So if you have the same base and there are exponents involved, this y has a y to the first power, right? Y is the same thing as y to the first power. Well, basically, you keep the same base, which is the y, and then you add the exponent. And y to the first power plus 2 is y to the third. Okay? So when you multiply exponents, the exponents will change. You basically add them. So let's take a look at number 5, 3y squared times negative 3y. So we're multiplying. We have 3 times negative 3. 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. We all know that. But we have y squared times y. So if I have y squared times y, that's basically y squared times y to the first power. So it's y to the 2 plus 1, or y to the third. And that's your answer. Number 6, we have 3x squared times the quantity of 4x to the third minus 8. So this is in front of the parentheses, meaning that we have to distribute this to each term. So we have 3x squared times 4x to the third, right? 3 times 4 is 12. But x squared times x to the third power is x to the fifth, because you're basically adding those exponents there. 3x squared times negative 8, 3 times negative 8 is negative 24, but we can't forget about the x squared. So x squared needs to be slapped on. 12x to the fifth minus 24x squared is your answer for number 6. Number 7, we have 2x minus 5 times the quantity of 3x plus 6. Notice that we have two binomials. A binomial is basically an expression with two terms. So we have two terms here and two terms here. So when you have to multiply two binomials, we use something called FOIL, which means first, outer, inner, last. So I'm looking at 2x. I'm going to multiply the 2x and the 3x. Basically, that's my first, right? I'm multiplying the first terms. So 2x times 3x, that's 2 times 3, that's 6. X times x is x squared. Then I'm going to multiply the first term with the outer term. So it's 2x times 6. So 2 times 6 is positive 12. And then you slap on the x. Next, you're going to multiply the inner term. So that's essentially negative 5 and 3. Negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. And then you slap on the x. And then lastly, you multiply the negative 5 and the 6. Negative 5 times 6 is negative 30. Now, we'll combine the like terms. We have 12x minus 15x. So you get 6x squared minus 3x minus 30. Alright, so number 8, we have x minus 3 times the quantity of 4x plus 7. So we have to multiply two binomials. So we will FOIL. So it'll be first, so x times 4x. There's a 1 here. So 1 times 4, that's 4x squared. Then we'll multiply the first and the outer term. So 1x times positive 7, that's 7x. And then looking at this negative 3, we multiply the inner term. So negative 3 times 4x, that's negative 12x. And then lastly, it's negative 3 times positive 7, that is negative 21. Then we'll combine the like terms. I get 4x squared, 7x minus 12x, that is negative 5x minus 21. Alright, number 9, 3x minus 1 quantity squared. Remember, if you have something like x squared or 5 squared, x squared is basically x times x. And it's the same thing with 5 squared, right? 5 squared is essentially 5 times 5. So if you have 3x minus 1 quantity squared, that's basically 3x minus 1 times 3x minus 1. So you're multiplying two binomials. So we're going to FOIL like we did last time. So 3x times 3x, 3 times 3 is 9. X times x is x squared. 3x times negative 1 is negative 3x. Negative 1 times 3x is negative 3x. And negative 1 times negative 1. Negative times a negative is a positive, so it's plus 1. I can combine the like terms here, so 9x squared, and then we have negative 3x minus 3x, that's a negative 6x, and then plus 1. Number 10 is a little weird, but that's okay, and I'm going to walk you through the process here. We have x minus 2 times this trinomial here, so a binomial times a trinomial. What we're going to do is we're going to look at this x here, and we're going to distribute that x to each term, okay? So x times 2x squared, there's a 1 in front of this x, so it's 1 times 2, that's 2, x times x squared is x times x times x, or x to the third power, right? So x times x squared, there's a invisible 1 here. You're going to add those exponents, so it's x to the third, right? So x times x squared is x to the third. Next, we have 1x times negative 5x. 1 times negative 5 is negative 5. X times x is x squared. And then 1x times positive 3. 1 times 3 is 3. But don't forget to slap on the x. And then the next thing that we have to do is look at this negative 2. And we're going to distribute the negative 2 to each term. So negative 2 times 2x squared, negative 2 times 2 is negative 4. And then slap on the x squared. Negative 2 times negative 5x, negative 2 times negative 5 is positive 10. Slap on the x. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Then we combine the like terms. We write our exponents from high to low. So we have 2x cubed. And then look, we have negative 5x squared minus 4x squared. So we'll combine those two terms. So negative 5x squared minus 4x squared is negative 9x squared. And then we have positive 3x plus 10x. And that's 13x. And then lastly, our constant is negative 6. That's the only constant that we have. So we'll put minus 6 as part of our answer. So 2x cubed minus 9x squared plus 13x minus 6 is the answer to number 10. Alright, so moving on to the last two problems for today. Multiplying polynomials with more than one variable. So if we look over here, we have a plus b times the quantity of 3a minus 5b. We actually have two variables. We have a and b. We know that in front of this a over here is a 1, okay? So since we have two binomials, we need to FOIL. So I'm going to multiply 1a with this 3a. So 1 times 3 is 3, and a times a is a squared. Next, we have 1a times negative 5b. Okay, and this is a little weird, but first of all, 1 times negative 5 is negative 5. And since this term has an a and this term has a b, what do we do with them if they're not the same? Well, if you're multiplying the a and the b, it's okay to write ab. So 1a times negative 5b is negative 5 times a times b. Okay? Alright, so now we're going to multiply the inner term, so b times 3a. Well, first of all, we know that there's an invisible 1 in front of the b. So 1 times 3 is 3. And then we have b times a. So b times a is ba, but I prefer to have it in alphabetical order. So instead of saying ba, I'll just write ab over here. Alright? And then lastly, we have 1b times negative 5b. So positive 1 times negative 5 is negative 5. And b times b is b squared. Okay? So we have 3a squared minus 5ab plus 3ab minus 5b squared. What I want you to do when we combine the like terms, you need to follow this rule over here. The rule is that we need to write this in alphabetical order. And remember, the exponents must go from high to low. Okay, so we have A and B. A is first in the alphabet, right? So we look at the A with the highest exponent, and that would be this over here. So it's 3a squared. Can I combine that with anything else? Nope, so we'll just write 3a to the second power. And then the next thing is we need to find the a with the next highest exponent, which is 1. So I see an a right here and also an a right there, and they both have a power of 1, right? So negative 5ab plus 3ab, negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2, and then ab. And lastly, we have that negative 5b squared. We can't combine that with anything else, so this is your answer. So 3a squared minus 2ab minus 5b squared is your answer. Number 12, we have x minus y times x squared minus xy plus y squared. So we have a binomial times a trinomial. This problem is very, very similar to number 10. So what I need to do is I look at this x and distribute that to each term in the trinomial. So x times x squared, that's x times x squared. So x to the first times x squared, or x to the first plus 2, that's x cubed, right? So x times x squared is x to the third, x times negative xy. So we have positive x times a negative x, that's just going to be negative x squared, but don't forget we have that y there. Okay, so the next thing is x times y squared. X times y squared, that's just positive xy squared. Okay? Now with this negative y, I'm going to distribute that to each term inside of the trinomial. Negative y times x squared, that's just negative x squared times y. Now remember, I like to write this in alphabetical order. So it's x first, then the y. So negative x squared times y. Next, we have negative y times negative x times y. So a negative times a negative is a positive, so plus. And then y times xy, that's just xy squared. Okay? Then lastly, we have negative y times positive y squared. Negative times a positive is a negative. And y times y squared is y to the third power. Alright? So don't forget about the rule here. In alphabetical order, exponents from high to low. X is first. We have x to the third power. That's the highest exponent, so I'll write x to the third. I can't combine that with anything else because there's no other term with the same variable raised to the same power. Okay, so it's x to the third power. Then what we're going to do is we're going to find the x with the next highest power, which is x squared. I can see one here and also here. So I have negative x squared y minus x squared y. So how many x squared y's do we have? Well, we know that there's an invisible 1 here and also there. So negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. So negative 2 x squared times y. And then we need to find the next highest exponent involving the x, which is xy squared. Can I combine that with anything else? Yes, there's another one right here. So xy squared plus xy squared, that's 2xy squared. And then we have negative y to the third power. So minus y to the third. So this is our answer.